Hey guys, welcome to another commentary done by Diggity. This is going to be between SKT and CJ Entus first match, Fantasy versus SkyHIgh on Shades of Twilight, which is a new map, which honestly it's Byzantium with a different tile set, and I'm not sure why they're fielding it. It just feels like an old map with a new look, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, we're going to see there's Fantasy starting at the 3 o'clock position as the teal terran, SkyHIgh starting at the 7 o'clock position, of course, as purple terran. And both these guys formidable TVT players. Fantasy has just been on a tear. I can't remember the last time he's lost a game. Pretty sure he's on a sizable winning streak. SkyHIgh has been struggling, but at the same time, he's proven himself to be one of the better players in Pro League. I don't think he's a guy you can underestimate. I am going to favor Fantasy simply because he has just been playing so well lately, and I feel like his TVT has been a little bit more time-tested than SkyHIgh, but SkyHIgh can pull some amazing things out. So we'll see how it goes down the line. CJ Entus, I think there's a little bit more pressure on them, so I think the pressure is a little bit, as a result, more on SkyHIgh. He really wants to set the tone of this match. The next match going up is going to be kind of a throwaway match. You have Snow versus Bisu on Neil Medusa. Feasibly, we know nothing about Snow, so maybe Bisu could get taken out, but seriously, I doubt it. Then we have Iris versus Best, which should be an incredible match on Heartbreak Ridge. A very fun map, I would say, for those two players in particular. You have Iris, who's the super aggressive guy, and Best, that has the insane macro. So I expect that to be one of those matches where you just have absolutely crazy battles very early on, straight through the mid-game. And Iris, I expect basically the way the game to go, Iris to do something standardly aggressive like he does, and then Best to just try to hold on and out-macro him. Would not be all that surprised to see either some Vulture drops or some 2-port Wraith, or, well, not 2-port Wraith versus Protoss, but Vulture drop or fast expansion into a ton of factories. Something really exciting in that match. All of a sudden, Punky deciding to be very creepy out in the crowd. Both players going for pretty standard builds. It looks like gas being put down a little bit later there for SkyHIgh rather than Fantasy. Fantasy building his barracks a little bit closer. And I think I think that would be the result on that, but it doesn't look like the time is going to be all that off. We'll see what these guys are up to, particularly on this map. I'm not quite sure what the strategies that have been employed. I assume they're very similar to Byzantium, simply because it's practically the same map layout. At least the first two bases, the additional expansions across the map are somewhat similar, but at least the opening positions are very similar. The only thing is instead of having the mineral, I would say a mineral-only expansion on the inside, kind of on the ramp, it's on the lower ramp, so siege tanks, I guess, could play a stronger role as far as defensive units across that part of the game in TVT. Both players starting to scout each other now. It looks like they're just going to be doing both going across each other, so they'll probably end up scouting each other a little bit faster. And also on Byzantium, there's a little bit more of the paths, as you can see with the SCVs going, is a little bit narrower, where there was a little bit, or I should say it goes closer to the middle, where it was a little bit narrower on Byzantium, and it looks like the two SCV scouts are going to run into each other. Just going to, pass, not really fight each other off all that much. Single Marine just kind of posted the forward position, but I do believe that there is another angle to come in, and if Fantasy's not careful, that SCV scout's just going to wander right through. Already another SCV in position to take a very quick command center. It looks like Fantasy's moving out for a command center of his own. Already plopped down, and looks like SkyHIgh's command center is just a little bit slower by 2 or 3 seconds. Not anything significant at this stage, but that does give us an indication that Fantasy's just playing quite well. Now that Marine's in that position to absorb that SCV scout, still not going to stop it, unfortunately. I'm not quite sure he didn't plant it at the other ramp. It looks like this SCV scout's actually going to get denied, taking a significant amount of damage, so a little bit of a bonus there early. Never mind, SkyHIgh's SCV scout coming around as well, sensing the timing of the Vulture that's popping out of Fantasy's base right now. A counter Vulture, so both players going for identical builds. One factory Vulture expansion here. And so we'll see, it'll just come down to macro management into the mid-game, I assume, because I don't see them switching anything up just yet. So there's a second factory. It looks like that second factory had also been put down by Fantasy a little bit sooner, and thus far it's been a very mirrored TVT with razor-thin margins. Fantasy just slightly ahead of his opponent. Looks like he's done a little bit more damage to his to SkyHIgh's barracks. I wanted to say CJ, as though CJ was an personified person. Wow, can't talk today. SCV is now being transferred to the second base by Fantasy. SkyHIgh putting down a third factory, interestingly enough, and it looks like both players just sticking to vultures in the early game, just to make sure that I think they're wanting to make sure they don't get caught out of position. Vultures very quick, very agile units. They can do the scouting. They can keep the Marines down. That gives them a decent amount of protection early game. And that also, if you go tank or you go Goliath, especially in the early game, you just end up having a trouble with mobility in the mid-game. SkyHIgh will end up with a larger capacity for production here into this transition, but a lot of vultures being produced in mines can really balance things out rather quickly, depending especially on the unit count. Looks like Fantasy is going to see that third factory being built here. Let's see how he decides to react. He's going to plop down a third factory of his own, which will be delayed, but with the distances on this map, I don't think he's going to end up in too much trouble here. But yeah, those vultures can be very effective, not just as attack units, but they can also force your opponent to be a little bit more defensive, because if they do anything, they try anything, say they did go Siege Tank Goliath, then they start pressing out, you can try to sneak those vultures in, do some economic damage. Then you have the spider mines just to slow everything down, then you can just go in for a quick counterattack kind of underneath. Although there are pretty narrow gaps across and that's which was about to bring up, which you can kind of seal exactly like this with the supply depot. Fourth factory now for Fantasy. It looks like a second machine shop where we still have the three factories on the opposite side from SkyHIgh, and now neither player really making a maneuver at one another, both playing very defensively, both just kind of setting up the games. Finally a tank, and I'm surprised we haven't seen Siege up to this point, but finally a tank and Siege being built there. I assume Siege is on the way for Fantasy. I think he's going to transition to more of a tank-heavy, with Vulture support army here very quickly, because he does have those two machine shops down. There's the Academy just to provide a little bit of comsat. So I think what he's going to try to do is he's going to time it just right to try to stomp on SkyHIgh as he might be pushing out to try to defend a third base here. SkyHIgh, though, it looks like he's plopping down an additional factory. He still hasn't taken his second gas, relying entirely on Vultures thus far as an attack force. We'll see how this pays off. He's not really going to be able to do any pressure here against this very narrow gap. It looks like instead he's just content to plant some mines, try to contain Fantasy in. But with those three siege tanks, they can roll pretty slowly, but that will give him an indicator. So if he does in fact try to do that, he might be able to sneak by with those vultures from that northern route. So trying to use them as more of that aggressive unit. But Fantasy's had that second gas up for quite some time. With the larger units, he will end up with, I would say, an advantage. So SkyHIgh is going to have to do something at least positioning-wise. Careful though, Fantasy leaving a couple vultures very exposed out there, and the one-on-one battles are not what he's looking for here. Fantasy trying to get in a position to do exactly that, to leave a vulture kind of in the mix, because the three tanks can take down mines at a time, but if you disrupt those tanks, their AI just goes berserk. You run a vulture in, it starts targeting the vulture, it doesn't start targeting the mines when they pop out, and as a result you can end up losing tanks. So Fantasy losing some time, some precious time here actually. Fifth factory being produced by SkyHIgh, and I think he saw that amount of tanks, he's like, okay, that was three tanks very quickly, I know he has two machine shops down, let me plop down another factory myself. And right now he's got a definite positional advantage. Even though he's had fewer factories, even though he's had less gas, he's just kind of sitting outside of Fantasy's door. It looks like he's in the position to create the contain. Fantasy realizes this. Looks like he's just going to try to push out slowly, but honestly he needs to hurry up, because he's not going to have a lot of time, not a big expansive period. Actually, without Siege even, the Siege tank's now being built there on the opposite side from SkyHIgh. Siege just upgrading, a couple mines underneath, but the question is how long will this contain last? So, yeah, but 5 factories from SkyHIgh, and it looks like a 5th factory now being produced by Fantasy, but right now SkyHIgh has a definite positional advantage. Unfortunately, he can't really do anything with it at this stage. A couple of vultures sneaking out there from the north. It's not like he's got to match Fantasy's production. He doesn't have a lot of breathing room to take an additional command center right now, so it looks like it's going to come down mostly to micromanagement, outmaneuvering opponents, and I have to say SkyHigh's been having a sizable advantage in those encounters. It looks like, oh, be able to run right in, the vultures taking out one tank, almost taking out a second with a mine there, but getting in pretty good proximity to that second tank to just wipe out all those forces that are getting spread out to the north. And it looks like, ooh, nice mine right there. It did land, take out that tank, and Fantasy's pinned back lost an attack force. It looks like 2 tanks to mostly vultures. SkyHIgh not missing a beat, immediately going to press down, use those vultures to screen a little bit here, and more reinforcements, as you can see, coming out of Fantasy's base to try to reinforce this, but a lot of losing a lot of units, and this is going to pin Fantasy back. You can see a little bit of disappointment on SkyHigh's face. I think he was thinking he was about to seal the game out, but the reinforcements coming just in time for Fantasy. He's still pinned back in his base, finally getting a dropship out, while looks like SkyHIgh is going to take an additional expansion, so this could work out for Fantasy if he can get a drop on that open expansion, maybe, or actually drop some vultures across that southern border. But either way, he's got to break out somehow. I think SkyHigh's easily going to be able to anticipate this maneuver, particularly because you've got the positional advantage. He knows he's kind of got Fantasy on his back heels. He knows that he's at least in a troop advantage here and there, just by a couple troops probably in that last fight, and he definitely got more tanks, definitely got more vultures. Overall, it looks like Fantasy supplementing with a lot of vultures that otherwise SkyHIgh doesn't have, because that's going into his command center instead. I think Fantasy is going to be able to sneak through, get a spot, might get a couple